Story number 1. The headlights in the snow. For as long as I've manned the midnight shift at mile marker 217th gas station on Highway 50, I've heard the old-timers call this stretch the loneliest road in America. It's no joke. Sometimes hours pass without a single pair of headlights cresting the horizon, and the desert night can press in on your mind like a silent, watchful predator. But in winter, when the snow drifts across the high desert, it's worse, an eerie hush that swallows the land. And after tonight, I know there's something else out there, something prowling the frosted highway under the black sky, something that doesn't let go once it finds you. My name is Scott Burke. I'm 29, divorced, no kids, just me and this job, graveyard shift at a rundown station on Highway 50 in central Nevada. The pay's barely enough to keep me in rent, but the quiet nights used to suit me fine. I could read a book, stare at the stars, dream of bigger things. But that was before a certain night in December, the night the snow came and brought a ghostly set of headlights to my door. The evening started as usual. Around 10 p.m., I took over from the day shift guy, Danny, who was anxious to head home before the weather turned. He said the forecast warned of a rare Nevada snowstorm blowing in from the west. I laughed it off. Snow out here is intermittent, but it happens. The station itself is a squat concrete box with a flickering neon sign reading gas, open 24 hours. We keep 2 pumps running, plus a small store of snacks, soda, jerky. Not exactly bustling, but enough for the occasional traveler braving this lonely highway. By midnight, the promised storm rolled in. Outside, a pale swirl of flakes drifted across the desert, dusting the old sign reading next services 90 miles. The overhead lamps around the pumps glowed in a wavering halo, the wind kicking up a mild whine. Inside, I was leaning on the counter, flipping through a battered paperback, a coffee steaming at my elbow. The overhead radio hissed with static, no real stations coming through. There's not much out here, just me, 4 walls, 2 pumps, and miles of emptiness in every direction. Around 1 a.m., I noticed movement at the far edge of the station's headlights, parked maybe 100 yards from the pumps. The high beams were on, glaring into the falling snow. I frowned, expecting some driver to come rolling up for gas. But the vehicle just sat there, engine rumbling faintly, from what I could tell. Nobody emerged. Usually, folks come straight to the pump. Why park so far away? I gave it a few minutes, waiting. The headlights never dimmed, no one stepped out. The wind rattled the station's front door. Curiosity pushed me to investigate. Slipping on my coat and beanie, I trudged out into the swirling snow. The cold bit at my cheeks. My boots crunched on the powder, dusting the asphalt. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows. Past the pumps, the deserted highway spanned out, blanketed in white. The vehicle's headlights cut 2 piercing beams through the dark. The wind carried a soft hiss across the desert. I approached carefully, arms raised to block the blinding beams. "Hello?" I called. The car was an old sedan, maybe a late 70s or early 80s model, big metal frame, the color lost in the gloom. The engine hummed. But even from a distance, I saw the driver's seat was empty. My pulse kicked up. I peered in the passenger window. Empty. The entire car was vacant, keys in the ignition, engine on, heater blowing lightly, radio off. The front seat had old newspapers scattered, a thermos in the cup holder. A small cross dangled from the rearview mirror. Snow dusted the windshield's edges. There were no footprints leading away from the car. That's when I realized the ground was untouched around the sedan, no sign of it driving up, no tire tracks in the fresh snow. As if it had simply appeared. My chest constricted. I circled the vehicle, calling hello? Anyone here? The wind carried my voice away. The trunk was locked. The license plate was half-caked in grime, reading something like NV3XX9. Hard to read. The interior reeked faintly of old cigarettes, stale coffee, and something else, an underlying mustiness that triggered a flicker of dread. I glanced around. The station lights glowed behind me, but the desert night pressed in from all sides. A feeling like being watched prickled my neck. I hustled back to the station, mind spinning. Maybe it's an abandoned car? Inside, I locked the doors, turned the sign to closed, though we never truly close, and stared out the window at the headlights cutting through the storm. My heart thudded. Part of me wanted to call the sheriff, but the phone lines out here are patchy. I tried anyway. Dead. The station's landline gave nothing but static. My cell had no signal. I was alone, with a running car and no driver. The snow thickened. The wind rattled the roof. I told myself maybe the driver wandered off, but to where? 2 a.m. The storm raged, swirling drifts around the station. The car's headlights remained unwavering, engine purring. I sipped coffee, hands trembling. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw a shape flick across the glass door, a fleeting figure. I jolted upright, peering out. No one. Just the glow of the pumps. My breath fogged the glass. A scraping sound on the roof made me jump. Sleep? Or footsteps? I reasoned I was letting nerves get to me. But then came the knock on the back door, 3 short raps. I almost dropped my mug. The back door was employees only, opening onto a small storage yard. Hello? I called, voice unsteady. No answer. Another 3 raps. I forced myself to approach. Flicking on the storeroom light, I saw the metal door rattling slightly. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. I unlatched it, bracing for a stranger. Nothing. Just the swirling snow, crates half buried, no footprints. I slammed it shut, chest tight. A final rap sounded from the outside. Then silence. I retreated to the front, scanning the bleak night. The sedan's headlights glared relentlessly. Why hadn't the engine died or run out of gas? The storm battered the station's windows. Then I heard a voice, muffled, calling my name. My skin went cold. No one here knows my name, I thought. The voice repeated, Scott, a drawn-out whisper riding the wind. I stepped back from the glass, fear building. This is insane, I muttered, hugging myself. At 3 a.m., the station lights flickered. For a moment, darkness swallowed me, the only glow the reflection of those damned headlights through the window. In that moment, I saw a face pressed against the glass, a gaunt visage with hollow eyes, mouth parted in a silent scream. The lights returned, revealing only empty space, no face. My heart hammered in my throat. The voice crooned my name again, from somewhere near the pumps, Scott, come out here. I was sure I was losing it. Another hour crawled by. The car remained. I realized something chilling. The headlights never frosted over, no snow accumulated on its windshield. As if time or weather avoided touching it. I tried to keep busy, restocking shelves, but my hands shook too much. The sense of being watched pressed on me. Then, around 4:30 a.m., I saw a second set of lights approaching from the highway, some car braving the storm. Relief surged in my chest, thinking help had arrived. The approaching vehicle turned into the station, rolling up to the pumps. A middle-aged man stepped out, battered coat, a face worn by the elements. Late for a fill-up, he joked. Storm's a killer. I nodded, nearly babbling about the phantom sedan. He gave me a puzzled look. We stepped inside so he could pay. I gestured to the headlights outside, explaining the bizarre car. But he squinted at me. What car? I only see my pickup out there. My heart sank. No, the old sedan. Parked back there, with its headlights on, I dragged him to the window. Sure enough, we both gazed into the swirling snow, and there was only his pickup. The phantom sedan was gone. My mind reeled. But it was there all night, I insisted. He shrugged, glancing at me with concern. He left, confused, after paying. I watched his taillights fade into the storm. Did I hallucinate the entire thing? But no, I found a patch of wet footprints in the station, leading from the front door to the window. I never left that path. My hair stood on end. Something entered here while I was distracted. Near dawn, the snow tapered off, leaving a thick, silent blanket across the desert. The horizon glowed with weak sunlight. I thought it was over, that maybe I'd had a delirious night from too much coffee or too little sleep. But as the sky brightened, I glimpsed movement outside, an outline of that old sedan again, reappearing at the edge of the station lights, like it had been waiting for the sun to come. The headlights still on, engine humming. My stomach lurched. Gathering every scrap of courage, I went out there again, the morning cold stinging my cheeks. The sedan was indeed back, same old model, same keys in the ignition, same thermos. I opened the passenger door this time, rummaging for ID. A rotted leather wallet in the glove box contained a license from a man named John Carver, dated 1982, with an address in Reno. My breath caught. 1982? The photo was a young man, tanned, smiling. Expired decades ago. Next, I found a tattered map of Highway 50 with scribbles. Then a Polaroid taped to the dash, a man, presumably John, by this very station, the old sign behind him. The Polaroid read December 28, 1982. That was the day he vanished, or so local rumors would say. My hands trembled. I retreated indoors, mind whirling. Was his ghost haunting these roads, still searching for a way out of the storm? The station phone lines were back up in the daylight, so I called the local sheriff. The deputy who answered sounded skeptical, but I insisted. He said he'd drive out. By the time he arrived, the sedan was gone again, no tire tracks. The deputy eyed me warily, as though suspecting a prank or that I was unhinged. He left after some half-hearted placation. Great. I half expected the nights to calm down after that, but they didn't. Over the next week, the phenomenon repeated. Some nights the sedan would appear earlier or remain longer. Each time, it vanished when another vehicle approached or daylight broke. I heard the tapping on windows, the whisper of my name. The last few nights, I saw a figure in the driver's seat, a man with his head lowered, face half lit by the dash lights, as if dozing or weeping. I never mustered courage to confront him. The environment felt charged with dread. My nerves frayed. I started sleeping days, terrified of the shift after midnight. Everything culminated in the final night I worked there, January 3rd. The forecast predicted another snow blast, ironically not as severe as the first. By midnight, the station was quiet, me alone again. The old sedan arrived at 12:45, headlights bright, pulling me to the window. This time, I saw the driver's door open, a silhouette step out, a tall figure in a heavy coat. I gaped, rummaging for my phone to record. The figure closed the door, leaving the engine running, and turned to look at me through the station's window, features hidden in shadow. He beckoned me with a slow wave, then vanished around the corner. My heart pounded. Against all reason, I locked the station door behind me, stepping outside with a flashlight. The swirling snow stung my cheeks. I circled the building, expecting to find footprints. There were none. The figure was gone. But from the darkness behind the station, I heard a faint voice, calling my name again. Something about its tone felt ancient, empty. I retreated inside, shaking, fumbling the lock. Then the headlights blinked off, leaving me in darkness. The station's overhead lamps flickered. I peered out, the car gone? No, it was still there, engine silent now, no lights. I stepped out again, half hypnotized. The interior dome light glowed faintly. The driver's seat was empty, door ajar. My mouth went dry. I approached, swallowing fear. The license plate in the rear read 1982 Ghost, or that's what my mind saw for a split second. Then it was normal again, an unreadable smear of rust. I forced the door fully open. The seat was damp, smelling of old water. The radio crackled to life, a staticky voice repeating, "Help me, get out, help me, get out." I slammed the door, stumbling backward. A sudden hush fell, the desert wind paused. Snow drifted gently. Then headlights from an approaching big rig washed over the station, and in that glare, the sedan blinked out of existence, leaving bare asphalt. I collapsed to my knees, breath ragged. The next morning, I quit the job, no explanation. I left that station behind, carrying only the memory of headlights in the snow and the whisper of a name from 1982. People say Highway 50's lonely, but I know it's haunted, roamed by a ghost driver stuck in an eternal loop of that final winter night. Sometimes, on long drives, I see phantom headlights trailing me or parked in a turnout with the engine idling. I tell myself it's just my imagination. But I recall the key in the ignition of that empty car, the wallet of a man who vanished decades ago, and the watery reflection in the window that was never quite my own. If you ever pass that old station at mile marker 217, especially when the snow drifts across the blacktop in the dead of night, keep your eyes on the road. Because if you see headlights parked in the darkness or a lone figure waving, urging you to stop, don't. Some roads never let you leave, and some souls never find rest, hungry for company in their endless winter. Story number 2. The final book. The Boston sky was already ink black by the time Amelia Morgan realized how late it had become. She set down her quill pen, an affectation she used for the romance of it, though it had slowed her note-taking to a crawl, and glanced at her wristwatch. Past 10 p.m. again. Another late night at the city's oldest library, the Alderson Public, an institution so venerable that half the city's residents seemed to forget it was still open. But Amelia, newly appointed as a junior archivist and overeager to prove herself, had volunteered for the after-hours inventory shift. She sat behind a wide oak desk in the library's upper wing, where the truly ancient volumes were stored, cracked spines, gold leaf worn from centuries of reverent hands, each book a story in itself. She'd spent the last few hours methodically checking them against an archaic card catalog, verifying the library's hidden treasures were still accounted for. The overhead lamps, antique brass fixtures that glowed faintly green, cast a dim, comforting light over the curved reading tables. Except something felt off tonight, a prickle of cold in the air that no aging radiator could chase away. A winter storm battered Boston's streets outside, an early December snowfall swirling in the lamplight. Usually, Amelia found the hush of snowfall soothing. But as she glanced at the high, arched windows, the drifting flakes looked more ominous than gentle. She rose from the desk, rubbing the ache in her neck. She needed to reshelve a final stack of old volumes in the next corridor, then she could close up and head home to her cramped apartment. If only the library's heater would stop its sputtering, it felt cold enough to see her breath. She gathered the books in a small pushcart and wheeled it down the corridor that led to the rare collections room. The corridor was long, lined with tall wooden shelves enclosed by iron gates. The floor was marble, each step echoing in the gloom. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision. She told herself it was just the flicker of old fluorescent tubes overhead. But the hush felt deeper, more charged. She paused at the heavy double doors that led to rare collections. Usually, she needed a key. She patted her pockets, found the ring, selected the correct key. The door unlocked with a resonant clunk. Inside, the overhead chandeliers glowed a faint gold, lighting row upon row of old wooden shelves. The ceiling soared, lost in the gloom, and tall arched windows overlooked the city skyline. The storm-swirling snow pressed white against the glass. She inhaled the comforting scent of leather bindings and dusty parchment. Something about it normally calmed her. Tonight, though, the air carried a deeper chill. She started placing each book in its rightful place, checking the small label. C. 1890, Ornithology, Basement. That was not right. Strange. She realized the labeling system had shifted. The ledger said these books belonged in the C2 section, which, as far as she knew, was across the room. She frowned, confusion tugging. Had the library staff reorganized? With a shrug, she pressed on, weaving between the shelves. Her footsteps echoed on the old floor, but the echoes felt a half-beat off, as if someone else also walked. As she turned a corner, she heard it clearly, the faint rustle of pages turning, a quiet flap as though someone was reading. She froze, heart quickening. At this hour, the library was closed, the rest of staff gone home. Could a patron have stayed behind, lost in reading? She peered around the tall shelves. The reading tables were empty, only a single old lamp burning. The rustle came again, from somewhere deeper in the stacks. She ventured forward, calling, "Hello?" "The library's closed. You shouldn't be here." Her voice sounded small. No response. She turned another corner, scanning the rows of old tomes. The rustle ceased. Silence. She scolded herself for letting her imagination run wild. But the cold spot around her grew more pronounced. Maybe a window is cracked open. She pressed on. Then footsteps echoed behind her, soft, deliberate, pacing across the marble. She spun around. No one. Her pulse thudded. She forced a laugh, tried to calm the hammer in her chest. Perhaps it was the building settling or her mind playing tricks after hours of quiet. She resumed shelving, ignoring the crawling sensation up her spine that told her she was not alone. Eventually, she finished, pushing the cart back out to the corridor. The corridor lights flickered, dimming for a moment, then returning. She quickened her pace. Time to lock up. She relocked the rare collections door, turned to head back to her desk. That's when she heard a distant sound, like a soft sob, somewhere among the far shelves. She hesitated, deciding whether to investigate or ignore it. Duty overcame fear. She pivoted, retracing her steps deeper into the library's older wings. The sobbing grew clearer, a muffled weeping. She followed it to a narrow hallway leading to a storage room rarely used. The door stood ajar, revealing a dark interior. "Hello," she called again, nerves frayed. The crying stopped abruptly. Summoning courage, she flicked on the light. The room was empty, just boxes of old newspapers, a table stacked with outdated encyclopedias. No sign of a living soul. She exhaled shakily, stepping back. She nearly brushed a form behind her. She yelped, spinning. Nothing. She realized the door had nearly swung shut on its own. An odd draft? She retreated, deciding she must be exhausted, hearing things. Enough. She'd closed the library now. She returned to the main lobby, turned off the overhead lights, locked the internal doors. The front entrance loomed with large glass panels. Outside, the snowfall thickened. She'd have to hail a cab or risk the tea not running. She stepped behind the main desk to gather her coat. That was when she noticed footprints on the marble floor near the door, wet footprints, as if someone with soggy shoes had stepped in from the cold. They led from the entrance to the corridor she'd just locked. Her blood iced. Who had come in? She'd locked the door behind her earlier. The footprints didn't go back out either. They just ended near the corridor, where they vanished. Fear clutched her chest. She faced a choice, flee or see if some trespasser lingered. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone, tried calling the library's security. No answer. Possibly gone home. She tried the local police line, static. The building's thick walls often disrupted cell signals. She hissed a curse, glancing at the footprints again. They glistened faintly in the overhead lamp. The shape was odd, no defined shoe print, more like a barefoot impression with elongated toes. Her heart hammered. Barefoot in winter? Compelled by a mixture of dread and duty, she followed the footprints, back into the corridor. The corridor's overhead lights flickered again. The footprints led to a side hallway that should lead to the older reading rooms. She flicked on each overhead lamp as she went, scanning corners. The air turned colder, her breath now faintly visible. She thought of the sobbing, the footsteps she'd heard. A ghost? Ridiculous, she told herself. But terror crept in. As she entered the older reading room, she froze. A silhouette stood by the tall window that overlooked the library's side courtyard. A man, hunched, his shoulders draped in something ragged, as though wearing an old overcoat. The reflection in the glass showed the swirling snow outside. In it, she glimpsed the man's face, hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, lips parted in sorrow. He clutched a book in one pale hand. The overhead lamp revealed half his body was translucent, like the shape of a shimmering haze. Her breath stuck in her throat. The shape turned toward her, the eyes full of longing. For a heartbeat, she felt pity overshadow fear. Who are you?" she managed. The figure didn't speak, just raised the book in trembling hands, opening it to a random page. She saw the text, some archaic volume, the words blurred. Then the shape moaned softly, as though in pain. She realized the moan matched the sob she heard earlier. He took a step forward, arm outstretched, the book's pages flipping on their own. She staggered back, colliding with a chair. The ghost advanced again, voice like the hiss of winter wind. I never finished the last pages. So cold. Then, as if a frigid gale blew through, the ghost flickered out. The overhead light sputtered off, plunging the room into darkness. Amelia's heart hammered. She scrambled for her phone flashlight, flicking it on, revealing an empty reading room once more. The ghost was gone. Shaken, Amelia raced back to the main desk, determined to flee. She tugged on her coat, typed the alarm code for the library's security system. But the panel glitched, refusing input. The swirling snow outside offered little comfort. She'd have to walk or find a cab in this weather. She resolved to lock the door and vanish, even if it meant braving the storm. Grabbing her bag, she tried the front door. It stuck, jammed by something. She yanked. No luck. She realized the door's handle refused to budge, as if locked from outside. Impossible. She rattled it. Stuck fast. Trapped. She'd find another exit. The library had side doors near the staff room. She rushed there, only to find them jammed too, as if the locks had fused. No exit. Desperation mounted. She called 911. No signal. She cursed, feeling tears threaten. She was alone, locked in with a ghost. The building's gloom pressed in. In the hush, she heard pages turning again, closer now, behind a bookshelf. She stifled a scream. The ghost was near. She recalled the story local librarians told of a man who froze to death in the library decades ago, locked in after hours, no caretaker around. Or so the rumor went. Could that be him? Seeking the final book he never finished? She decided if that was so, maybe returning the book he clutched to its shelf might help. Or letting him finish reading somehow? She scoured the library records in the old card catalog near the rare collections. After frantic searching, she found mention of a Mr. Joseph Barrow, discovered dead from hypothermia in 1934, caught in a winter storm. The rumor said he was enthralled by a certain text, something about Arctic expeditions. But the library staff found him near the shelves, his last borrowed book missing from the collection. The log said, book title, Polar Darkness, last checked out to J. Barrow, never returned. If that was the item, perhaps the ghost yearned for it. She darted to the older stacks where polar exploration volumes might be. The overhead lamps flickered. She rummaged among the musty spines. Sure enough, an empty space indicated Polar Darkness was missing. Could the ghost be carrying it? A sudden cold swirl enveloped her, the ghost's presence maybe. She turned, nearly colliding with him. He hovered inches away, the battered book in one transparent hand. She stifled a cry, forcing calm. The ghost's eyes bored into hers, silent pleas shining. She inhaled, summoning courage. Let me help you, she whispered. The ghost raised the book, flipping to the last pages. She saw them partially torn, the text faint. The figure tried to read, lips moving without sound. Then a hollow moan, as though he couldn't see the words. The pages were disintegrating under spectral fingertips. She extended her hand, carefully taking the book. The ghost didn't resist. Its face contorted with sorrow. She realized she might need to read it aloud, help him finish. Her heart pounded, fear mingled with pity. Gathering herself, she found a nearby reading table, turned on a lamp. The ghost followed, drifting. She opened Polar Darkness to the final chapter, the pages stained and brittle. She began reading softly, the text describing the explorer's final days locked in an Arctic ship. The ghost hovered over her shoulder. Each word she read seemed to ease the tension in the library's air. The overhead light steadied, the cold pockets receded. Amelia read on, voice trembling but steady. The explorer recounted a last stand against the polar night, drifting ice, hopelessness. As she neared the final paragraph, the ghost leaned closer, face twisted with longing. She finished the last sentence, and thus we find no rescue from the cold, only the silence of endless night. She closed the book. The ghost exhaled a soft sob, a swirl of cold wind passing through Amelia. Then he nodded slowly, form flickering. He stepped backward, as if unburdened. The sorrow in his eyes gentled. Another swirl of wind, and the ghost dissipated, leaving a faint swirl of snow in his wake. Amelia blinked, tears on her cheeks. The hush in the library felt calmer, somehow. She rose, the book in hand. Then a bright beep from the front of the library, her phone alert. She sprinted there, found the front door easily unlatching. The storm had eased, a faint dawn glow outside. The door opened to fresh fallen snow and a quiet city street, plows clearing the main roads. She exhaled in relief, stepping out into the cold. The library's meltdown had ended with the ghost's departure. She reported none of this to her supervisors, only that she got locked in temporarily by a glitch. But in the subsequent nights, the library felt warmer, the old timbers less foreboding. A week later, while shelving in rare collections, Amelia found Polar Darkness returned properly to its place, neat and labeled. She smiled, a sense of closure washing over her. Whatever lingered there found peace in the last pages of that book. To this day, Amelia remains the only staffer willing to do late-night shifts. She claims it's quieter that time of night, easier to get work done. But if you watch her closely, you'll see her occasionally glance at a certain corner, as if expecting a silent figure to approach, book in hand, searching for an ending he never got to read. And perhaps, on the coldest winter nights, some visitors swear they hear pages turning in the deserted aisles. The caretaker just shrugs, muttering about old ghost stories. But Amelia knows better. So if you ever find yourself in that old Boston library, dwarfed by its towering shelves and chilled by an inexplicable draft, pay attention if you hear a faint rustling of pages, or the distant shuffle of boots on marble after closing time. It might be the spirit of Joseph Barrow, still searching for someone to read him that final chapter, still haunted by the winter's cold that claimed his life. And if you sense a presence behind you in the hush, don't run, just open the book. Sometimes, finishing a story is all it takes to free a restless soul from the endless freeze of an unfinished ending. Story number 3. The Patient in the Hall. I started the security job at the old Anchorage General Hospital 2 weeks before Christmas. People called me crazy for taking a night shift at an abandoned, partially condemned building in the dead of winter. But honestly, I needed the money, and the idea of quiet nights catching up on books or streaming shows on my phone sounded appealing. Anchorage winters don't scare me, I was born and bred here. Yet what I experienced in that husk of a hospital has forever changed my perspective on lonely buildings and silent corridors. They shuttered Anchorage General nearly 2 decades ago, after budgeting shortfalls and the opening of a more modern facility across town. They kept a skeleton staff of maintenance workers for a while, but eventually, even they left. The city, however, still owned the property, which was slated for demolition or renovation. Meanwhile, someone had to guard it against vandals and squatters. Enter me, Charlie Monroe, new night shift security. The contract was short, 6 weeks over the winter, covering the building's last days before the city decided its fate. The structure itself is 5 stories of 1970s concrete blandness, ringed by a defunct parking lot now buried under perpetual snowdrifts. Some wings had collapsed ceilings, others were locked off entirely. Power was minimal, enough to keep emergency lighting and a few strategic cameras working. Heating was turned off save for a small booth near the entrance, my office, if you could call it that. The rest of the hospital was cold, silent. In a typical year, I was told, hardly a soul would enter in these months. Except the storms. Ah, the storms. Anchorage gets harsh winters, but that December hammered us early, wind howling off the inlet, temperatures dropping well below zero, snow piling up in swirling drifts. The hospital sat near the edge of the city, half forgotten, barely visible from the main road. My shift started at 10 p.m., ended at 6 a.m. I'd arrive, wave at the day guard, who seemed relieved to escape. Then I'd do a quick perimeter walk, check cameras, settle in with a thermos of coffee. The hush of the deserted corridors surrounded me like a tomb. Only the hum of a few lights and the occasional pop of an old pipe reminded me I wasn't dead. For the first week, nothing more than squeaking rats, gusts rattling busted windows, or weird echoes of my own footsteps. I'd be lying if I said I didn't spook myself sometimes, passing a long hallway of half-broken fluorescent lights, seeing my reflection in a window and jumping. But each time, I forced a laugh and pressed on. This was an easy gig, right? But the second week came, and so did the heavy snow. One night, I sat in the security booth, half drowsing, eyes on the flickering monitor feeds from the few functional cameras. That's when camera 3, covering the main second-floor corridor, flicked from static to an image. There, in the middle of the hallway, sat a man in a hospital gown, slouched against the wall, knees drawn up, face hidden by a fall of greasy hair. I jolted upright, coffee nearly spilling. A trespasser? In this snowstorm? I flicked the mic, attempting to speak through the hospital's ancient PA system. No response. The man on the screen didn't move. Heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight, radio, keys, and hurried upstairs. My footsteps echoed in the dark. By the time I reached the second-floor corridor, I could see my breath. No heat circulated. The camera feed from my phone's app still showed the man slumped there, close to room 214. But in reality, the corridor was empty. Just peeling paint and dust swirling in the beam of my flashlight. I walked to the exact spot the camera indicated, scanning every door, shining light in every corner. Nothing. No footprints on the dusty floor. The hair on my neck stood up. I radioed maintenance, forgetting we had none. My mind spun. Glitch? Maybe an old recording. I returned to the security booth, reviewing the feed's playback. The man had vanished at 12:43 a.m., a minute after I left to investigate. The feed after that time showed the corridor empty. I chalked it up to a technical glitch, maybe old data overlaying a current feed. Shaken, I kept watch for the rest of the night, no further incidents. Next night, camera 5, covering the third-floor east wing, flickered around 1 a.m. Then a shape drifted across the screen, the same man, hair limp, face pale, drifting down the corridor as if searching for something. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to chase illusions again, but my job demanded it. The corridor was similarly empty when I arrived, the air icier than the rest of the building. I noticed fresh watery footprints on the tile, leading nowhere, fading after a few steps. No occupant, though. A creeping dread told me this was not a glitch. I began rummaging through old logs, disclaimers, any record of past incidents. I found minimal references. Staff rumored a man froze to death here decades ago when a blizzard hit and no one realized he was locked in an isolated ward. Could that be the cause of these sightings? Ghost stories are a dime a dozen in old hospitals, but the camera feed was not lying. Over the next nights, sightings recurred. The man would appear on different floors, rarely the same camera twice, always near some hallway or door, wearing that tattered gown, shoulders hunched, as if lost. Then he'd vanish. As the winter hammered down, the building's cold spots multiplied. Some hallways crackled with frost on the walls. I tried to keep calm, but each time the man appeared on the monitors, I felt an oppressive sadness and terror. I never saw his face. He always crouched or turned away, but the aura of despair was tangible. By the second weekend, a monstrous storm slammed Anchorage, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow. The roads near the hospital closed. I was stuck on night shift, the day guard's relief run canceled. I prepared for a long, lonely vigil. That night, the storm battered the windows, the wind shrieking. Around 1:30 a.m., the monitors flickered in unison. For a moment, they all displayed the same feed, the man kneeling in a corridor, head bowed, arms limp. Then each camera reverted to normal, except camera 9, which displayed the main first-floor lobby. He was there, hunched near the front entrance, as though he tried to leave but found it locked. My heart thudded. Summoning courage, I decided to meet him there. Maybe direct confrontation would help. Some legends say acknowledging a ghost can help lay it to rest. I hurried to the lobby, footsteps echoing. The overhead lamps glowed an anemic yellow, revealing the same scuffed tiles, the deserted reception desk. I glimpsed him just then, leaning against the glass doors from the inside, as though gazing out at the swirling snow. He turned slightly, letting me see the side of his face, cheeks sunken, eyes black pits, breath condensing in a ghostly exhale. My breath caught. I forced my feet forward. "Sir?" I called softly. "Are you okay?" The figure turned fully now, revealing a gaunt face with cracked lips. A wave of cold slammed me, as if a door to the Arctic had opened. Then he vanished, blinked out of existence, leaving only swirling dust motes in my flashlight beam. I exhaled raggedly, hard hammering. The sadness in his eyes stung me, though. He looked so lost. My mind reeled. What does he want? I wondered if finishing some undone business might free him. Checking the old records again, I found a single mention, a patient named Edward Marshall, admitted for pneumonia in the 1980s. During a catastrophic snowstorm, staff supposedly evaluated the building or lost track of him. By the time rescue returned, they found him frozen in a locked ward, alone. The body wasn't discovered for days. A horrifying negligence. The records were vague, probably suppressed by liability concerns. But a nurse's note read, he kept calling for help, but we never came. He died waiting. It clicked. He was looking for someone to help him out of the building, away from that final winter that claimed him. Or so the ghost stories go. That next night, near 3 a.m., I noticed the temperature plummeted in the main hallway outside my booth. I stepped out, seeing faint footprints in the frost-laden floor. Barefoot prints, heading to the east exit. I followed them, calling gently, "Edward? Are you here?" My voice trembled. The footprints led me to the old Ward C wing, shuttered for decades. The door was half blocked by debris. I forced it open, stepping into complete darkness except for my flashlight. The corridor was frigid, my breath a white plume. In the last room at the end, I found him. The ghost hovered by a broken window, snow drifting in. He turned to face me. This time, he spoke in a voice that hissed like wind through shattered glass. I never left, my pulse pounded. Summoning nerve, I said, "I can help you. Let me lead you out." The ghost's expression flickered between hope and anguish. He drifted forward, trembling, as though he wanted to follow me. We moved back through the corridor. At times, he vanished, reappearing behind me, moaning. I coaxed him, urging him to come. The entire building felt alive with cold, lights flickering, each step crunching frost. We reached the main entrance. I pushed open the heavy door, somehow it wasn't locked. Snow and wind blasted in. The ghost paused on the threshold, staring at the swirling night. I willed him to step out. He raised his gaze to me, lips parted in silent gratitude. Then, like a ribbon of smoke, he drifted forward, out into the snow. The storm parted for an instant, revealing his shape dissolving into the whiteness. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw him smile. Then he was gone, leaving the night empty. The hush that followed felt profound, like the building exhaled. A wave of relief swelled in my chest. The unnatural cold receded, the overhead lights brightened. I closed the door slowly, tears blurring my vision. Then, as dawn broke, the storm eased, plows arrived, the day shift staff eventually showed. I told them the roads were clearing, my shift was over. They saw my exhaustion, asked no questions. I left, never to return. Months later, a different security company took over. The rumor is they found no haunting, no ghost. Perhaps the lost soul of Edward Marshall finally found release in that final exit. Or maybe the building remains a threshold between this world and a cold eternity. But I sense he's free, no longer trapped in endless winter inside those walls. Still, on nights when a storm rages, I dream of that corridor, the swirling snow, and a gaunt figure gazing out the glass. His voice echoes, "Help me out." Then I recall the last moment I saw him vanish into the midnight wind. I believe that was his final release. So if you ever find yourself driving lonely highways near Anchorage, passing an abandoned hospital half buried in winter's hush, keep your eyes forward. Because in the swirling snow, restless spirits may linger, replaying the final tragedy that trapped them in an eternal freeze, waiting for one kind soul to open the door and guide them into the storm, letting them fade at last. Story number 4. The Machines That Never Rest. I never believed in ghosts, at least not until I started the night shift at the old Riverside Steel Mill outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The place was half-shuttered, a relic of better days when steel was king and the blast furnaces glowed red-hot around the clock. Now, in the dead of winter, only a few lines remained operational, spitting occasional sparks into the gloom, and I was one of the unlucky souls assigned to keep an eye on them overnight. Nobody told me about the ghost, but maybe that's because nobody wanted to believe it themselves. My name is Sam Fletcher. I'm 34, divorced, with little to my name but a battered Chevy and too many regrets. The mill job was the only thing I could find after being laid off from construction in the slowdown. The pay was better than nothing, and the hours suited my nocturnal habits, at least I thought so, until the nights turned long and cold, and I realized the old steel mill had a life of its own. I started a couple of weeks before Christmas. The city was in the grip of an early, brutal winter, sub-zero temps at night, howling winds blowing off the Monongahela River, swirling flurries that caked every surface in gray ice. By the time I arrived each evening, the yard around the mill was empty, lit only by the glow of sparse floodlights. Most day shift workers left by 6 p.m., leaving behind a skeleton crew, a couple of furnace operators in the far building, a night foreman, and me, the lone watchman for the lesser-used sections. The mill complex stretched for acres, an industrial maze of rusted walkways, enormous rolling mills, silent crane tracks overhead. I'd spend my nights doing rounds, checking for trespassers or mechanical malfunctions. The upper catwalks, once bustling with men and molten steel, were often deserted. The wind keened through the rafters, mixing with the distant hiss of steam from the few lines still running. Not exactly cozy, but I told myself it was a job, and I could handle the emptiness. I even liked the sense of history in those old beams and soot-stained walls. The first sign that something was off came on my third shift. I was in the main control room, a long, narrow space lined with dials and gauges, most of them dark and abandoned. Only one small station glowed with digital readouts for the single active rolling line. Sipping stale coffee from a thermos, I was flipping through an old training manual, half bored. Suddenly, I heard the clang of metal on metal echo from the hall. At midnight, that was unusual, only the furnace team might be around, and they worked in a different wing. I stepped out to investigate. The corridor smelled of cold iron, my breath visible in the chill. I saw no one. Another clang, behind me. I whirled, nothing but shadows. The noise ceased. Could be settling pipes, I told myself, or expansions from temperature changes. I returned to the control room, uneasy. Over the next few nights, these random noises persisted. Footsteps on the catwalk overhead, the hiss of a machine venting steam that shouldn't be running, the scratch of something on a metal wall. Each time, I found no source. Meanwhile, the night foreman, Big Mike, teased me that the old place was full of ghosts. Folks have died in these lines, he said, accidents, back when safety was an afterthought. He recounted rumors of a worker crushed by a faulty press decades ago. They never cleaned up that corner properly, he'd say, half joking. My hair stood on end. I laughed it off in front of him, but a kernel of dread grew inside me. Then came the first real encounter. It was about 2 a.m., and I was making my usual patrol through the older rolling mill section, a deserted area with half the lines dismantled. We kept the lights dim there, overhead fixtures flickering. The wind outside battered the corrugated steel walls, and I had to wedge my flashlight in my armpit as I took notes on a battered clipboard. That's when I noticed a faint glow at the far end of the walkway, like a machine panel had lit up. Curious, I approached. Sure enough, an old rolling mill control panel flickered with indicator lights. But that line was decommissioned, no power supply. My pulse kicked up. I stepped closer. The lights blinked as if the panel was calibrating itself. Then the rolling mill, a massive contraption of gears and rollers, emitted a low groan, as if coming to life. Impossible, I breathed. I scanned for any sign of tampering. The main power switch was locked in OFF position. The line was physically disconnected from the main circuit. Yet the machine gave a shudder, belts trembling like half-revived muscles. A wave of cold washed over me. The temperature plunged. I saw my breath condense in a white plume. Then I heard it, a soft, ragged moan, echoing across the metal husks. My flashlight beam trembled as I spun around, searching for a living person. No one was there. Another moan, closer, behind me. I whipped back toward the machine and nearly dropped the flashlight. Standing by the control panel was a figure, half shrouded in darkness. A man, maybe in his 40s, wearing a grimy steelworker's uniform, the old-fashioned kind with the mill's outdated logo. His face was twisted, contorted in pain, eyes wide and unseeing. A horrific indentation marred his torso, as if something crushed him. Bloodstains darkened his shirt. I bit back a scream. Before I could speak, the figure vanished, dissolving into the gloom. The panel lights flickered off, the rolling mill went silent. I was alone, gasping for air. The corridor lights overhead popped, leaving me in near darkness. Adrenaline pumped through me. I ran, stumbling back to the main control room. My mind spun, a hallucination? Stress? Or a ghost? I found Big Mike near the active line, told him everything in a frantic rush. He eyed me wearily but nodded. People have claimed to see him for years, he said softly, a trace of pity in his voice. They say he replays the accident, tries to warn others, or maybe lure them to the same fate. The next nights were worse. The entire older mill seemed alive, machines powering on for seconds, belts whirring, lights blinking. Each time I'd hurry over, I'd see fleeting glimpses of that worker, his uniform torn, face contorted in terror, reenacting the last moments of his life. Then he'd vanish, leaving me trembling. Doors slammed behind me, the floor slick with a sudden layer of condensation that felt like cold sweat from the steel itself. One bitterly cold night, the exterior temperature dropped to negative digits. The furnace crew was minimal, just me, Big Mike, and a single operator. We stayed mostly in the break room near the active line. But I had to do final rounds at 3 a.m. I dreaded entering the old wing. My footsteps echoed, the overhead lights flickered. The corridor reeked of old grease, dust, and something metallic, blood. An unstoppable sense of dread weighed on me. Halfway down the corridor, I found fresh footprints in the grime, large, booted prints leading from the defunct rolling mill to a corner next to a disused press machine. My heart pounded. The footprints just ended at the press. Suddenly, the press machine hissed, ancient hydraulics coughing to life. A grinding whine. Light from the control panel flared. The ghost stood by it again, his face locked in that final expression. My chest tightened with horror. Then, unbelievably, the press lurched downward, metal plates slamming with brutal force. I swear I heard the ghost scream echo, a memory or an echo of his tragic last breath. The press rose again, dripping spectral fluid that vanished as it fell, as though time repeated the accident. I couldn't breathe. The ghost turned to me, half his torso caved in, jaw slack with endless pain. He reached out a hand. "Help," he rasped. Or that's how it sounded. My legs nearly buckled. How can I help him? Some legends say if you bury the remains or talk to the spirit, it might find peace. But he died decades ago, presumably he was buried. Then the overhead lights sparked, and the figure vanished once more. The press fell silent, the panel dark. The corridor was empty. Enough. I sprinted to Big Mike, told him we had to call management, maybe get a priest. "Kid," he said, calling me kid though I was near 30. "I told you. This place is older than both of us. The ghost is part of it. Management doesn't care, they want the line to keep running until final closure. Then it'll all be demolished. We just do our shift." He shook his head, a mix of resignation and fear. But that last night shift of mine, the storm peaked, snowfall burying the roads. The manager told us we had to stay inside the mill, no going home. The ghostly activity escalated. Machines in the abandoned wing roared to life for minutes at a time. Alarm lights blinked on the control boards, screaming non-existent malfunctions. I rushed to shut them off, only to see the same battered, bleeding figure appear behind the cracked console, begging me with his eyes. Then, in a swirl of sparks, the console died, and he vanished. Toward dawn, I heard frantic pounding near the old forging area, metal on metal. I followed the racket, discovered the overhead crane swinging on its own, cables rattling as if it might drop a massive scrap bin. The ghost stood near the crane control booth, pointing at me. Or was he pointing at the floor beneath the crane? I scrambled aside as the crane groaned, the bin slipping from the cable. It slammed into the concrete with a thunderous crash, sending shards of metal flying. The ghost let out a despairing moan, arms raised, then flickered away. I realized he was restaging accidents, reliving his final moments, maybe drawing me closer to the same fate. Or perhaps he was showing me how he died, some industrial misfortune with a crane or press. The distinction was moot. He wanted me gone or wanted me to understand. At shift's end, the roads were semi-passable. I told Big Mike I was quitting, done. He gave me a sad nod, as if not surprised. You can't outrun him. Once you've seen him, you carry it, he said cryptically. But I left anyway, driving away from the mill, half expecting the ghost to manifest in my rearview mirror. Now, weeks later, I can't sleep. In nightmares, I see the ghost reenact that brutal crushing. I hear machines hum in empty darkness, see the flicker of arc lights on corroded steel, sense him calling me back. Sometimes, I wake to hear phantom clanging in my apartment's pipes, or catch a reflection of that hollow-eyed face in windows at night. I fear he's latched onto me, longing for me to retell his story or to finish his final shift. Folks in Pittsburgh talk about the decline of steel, the shuttered mills left behind. But I suspect some mills harbor more than dust. If you ever take a job in an abandoned plant's night shift, and you hear the clang of metal in a silent wing or see an ancient press spark to life, watch your back. The spirit of a worker who died in agony might roam the halls, stuck in that final winter shift, replaying the fatal accident. And it might want you to join him, to become another echo in the endless mechanical lullaby of machines that never rest. That's my cautionary tale. The Riverside Steel Mill is slated for demolition soon. I wonder if that ghost's torment ends with the wrecking ball, or if he'll remain, lost among twisted beams, forever haunting the broken skeleton of the place he died. My guess? Some tragedies never truly end. They linger, fueling the machinery's phantom hum, beckoning the unwary into its lethal memory. And on stormy nights, under flickering lights, you might hear the rolling mill groan back to life, repeating the final beat of a worker's heartbeat, a ghost trapped in the cogs of time. Story number 5. The Witch Behind the Veil. If you've ever strolled the narrow streets of Salem, Massachusetts on a winter's night, you'll know the town's history weighs heavily in the chill air. Tales of old trials and accusations linger like ghosts in the lamplight. I never put much stock in rumors of curses or restless spirits until I took the night watch at the Merriman Witchcraft Museum, a modest place that supposedly housed relics from the infamous 1692 trials. I thought I'd pass the nights counting dusty artifacts, occasionally scolding a bored teenager sneaking in. I had no idea I'd come face to face with a spirit consumed by injustice, desperate for retribution. My name is Patricia Barnes. I'd moved to Salem in November, fresh from a museum studies program in Boston, needing a job to keep afloat while searching for better opportunities. The Merriman Museum was small, off the main tourist route, overshadowed by larger attractions in Salem. But it had its own niche, an impressive collection of diaries, trial documents, and personal items from those accused of witchcraft. The museum's caretaker, Mr. Holloway, hired me for the night shift, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., primarily to ensure no vandals or thrill-seekers messed with the exhibits during these dark winter nights. In early December, I began. The building itself was old, a two-story structure with creaking floors and a narrow central staircase. The exhibit spanned 5 rooms on the ground floor. The second floor was an attic-like archive, locked off. My job? Wander the exhibit halls hourly, check the display cases, watch the small bank of security monitors in the front office. Straightforward enough. But from night one, I sensed something was off. A hush deeper than I expected blanketed the museum after closing. Footsteps echoed louder than normal, and the heating system groaned in the vents. Little flickers of shadow caught my peripheral vision as I patrolled among the glass cases, each one containing artifacts like tattered letters, broken wooden spoons, or battered garments from the 17th century. A single large display in the center hall boasted a modest array of personal items, a small witch's poppet, a rag doll used as alleged evidence, a silver ring, and a worn black veil said to have belonged to an accused woman. The sign read, "Veil of Prudence Blackwood, 1692. Prudence Blackwood, my mind conjured images of archaic courtrooms, heartless judges, the raw fear of witchcraft hysteria. The museum's text described her as a local midwife labeled a witch, condemned in the winter of 1692. She died in jail from sickness before her trial concluded. Her name was overshadowed by the more famous victims, but apparently her story was one of the cruelest injustices, imprisoned for weeks in the freezing jail. The veil, found among her remains, was rumored to carry the sorrow of her final days. On my third night, I was flipping through the museum's guest log at the front desk, bored. Around 11 p.m., the overhead lights flickered, a brief surge. Then my radio crackled. The feed from the security cameras flickered on the small monitor. One camera, pointed at the main exhibit hall, showed a faint silhouette crossing the floor near the center display. My heart jolted. No one was supposed to be inside but me. The figure wore a long, old-fashioned dress, face obscured by a dark haze. She glided soundlessly, paused by the glass case containing Prudence Blackwood's veil, then vanished. I hustled out from behind the desk, flashlight in hand. The main hall lay empty, the overhead lamps glowing steadily now. No sign of forced entry, no footsteps. The glass case with the veil was undisturbed. Just my nerves, I told myself, or some glitch in the camera feed. But a ripple of unease lingered, the memory of that silhouette in old-fashioned dress haunting me. The next evening, near midnight, I did a routine patrol. Snow fell outside, swirling against the small windows. The building was colder than usual, our antique heating system struggled. As I neared the central display, I noticed something. The black veil inside the case was not neatly folded as before. Instead, it lay crumpled, as if handled. No sign of forced opening on the case, the lock intact. Yet the veil's position had changed. A trick of memory? Possibly. I carefully repositioned it, telling myself maybe the cleaning staff brushed it. But a creeping dread said otherwise. Around 2 a.m., the lights dimmed abruptly, flickering overhead. I froze, hearing a soft rustle behind me, like fabric brushing across the floor. I spun, flashlight raised. A woman stood at the end of the corridor, face shrouded by a black veil, wearing a 17th-century style dress. My heart seized. Her posture was rigid, arms at her sides. She seemed half-translucent, a pale glow emanating from her figure. Then, in a blink, she melted into the shadows near an old portrait. I nearly dropped my flashlight. My rational mind insisted, a trick of the light, an afterimage. But the corridors were dead still, dust motes drifting in the faint lamp glow. The stench of old wool or damp cloth hung in the air. I forced myself to approach the spot where the woman vanished, hoping to find. I'm not sure. Footprints? Nothing. The air felt unnaturally cold. I retreated to the front office, locking the door behind me, adrenaline pounding. Sleep was impossible when I got home. The next night, I arrived anxious, half expecting the phantom to greet me at the door. The hours dragged. I tried occupying myself with inventory logs. Then, around 1 a.m., the security monitor beeped, capturing motion in the old witch's tools exhibit. I flicked the screen to see a faint figure hunched over the display case. Again, the black dress, the veil. She placed a hand on the glass, as though longing to retrieve an item inside. I grabbed my flashlight, dashed to the exhibit. Empty, as usual. No sign of tampering. But I felt a presence, a hush deeper than the building's normal silence. I heard a ragged breath, as if someone stood just behind me. I refused to turn, I was too terrified. I squeaked, "Who are you? What do you want?" The only answer was a soft moan echoing in the gloom. Then footsteps, light, deliberate, retreating behind the shelves. I turned, shining my beam. Nothing. My limbs shook. I found a battered ledger among the older notes about this museum's artifacts. Flicking through by the safety of the front desk, I discovered references to a repeated phenomenon, staff seeing a veiled woman in black near Prudence Blackwood's items, especially in winter. Many resigned soon after, spooked by strange occurrences, whispers at night, the veil shifting in its case, shadowy shapes in the corridor. One note said, "The spirit seeks redress for a wrongful death in the bitter cold of 1692. She roams each winter, longing for justice or a companion in her final fate." That line chilled me to my core. The next night was a Friday, the storm outside heavier, wind scouring the old brick walls. My shift started calmly enough. But near midnight, the overhead lights flickered, then died. Only emergency lamps cast weak orange glows. The backup generator coughed to life slowly, leaving half the building in shadow. Footsteps clacked on the floor overhead, though the second floor was locked and dark. I had to check. My spine tingled. Climbing those creaky stairs, I used the flashlight to sweep the dusty old floor. Rows of archival boxes, unlit displays. The footsteps paced at the far end. I followed, calling, "Show yourself." A foolish bravado. Through a parted door leading to a defunct reading room, I saw her, the veiled figure, back turned, her breath a soft white cloud in the cold air. She stood among old desks, the windows behind her caked with frost. She slowly turned toward me, lifting her veil. I couldn't quite see her face, only hollow eye sockets, a gaping mouth, an endless expression of sorrow. She let out a whisper, cold, so cold, her voice resonated with centuries of heartbreak. My hand shook, the flashlight being jittering. I felt tears sting my eyes, an inexplicable empathy for her agony. Then her expression twisted in rage, her mouth opening in a silent wail. The temperature plummeted, ice crystals formed on the desk edges. She advanced toward me, arms outstretched. I stumbled back, nearly falling over a chair. Summoning my last shred of courage, I gasped, "You were innocent. I'm sorry for what happened to you." The ghost paused, face contorting. For a moment, I sensed a flicker of calm. Then a wave of freezing air slammed into me, knocking me to the floor. The overhead lamp shattered in a burst of sparks, leaving only the flashlight. Darkness swallowed her shape. I scrambled out the door, nearly tumbling down the stairs. Panting, I retreated to the main hall. My thoughts raced, she's trapped, repeating the final torment of that freezing cell. Or so the diaries implied. Possibly if I brought her story to light, she could rest. But how? I had no illusions of banishing a ghost alone. Then the security alarms beeped, indicating movement in the main exhibit hall. On the camera feed, I saw her again, now at the glass case with the black veil. She lifted the glass as if intangible, retrieving the veil from inside. My heart lurched. If that item physically vanished, this haunting was no intangible phenomenon. Sure enough, the camera showed her holding the veil, turning to face the lens, hollow eyes brimming with malice. She faded away, leaving the case empty. I had to see for myself. Rushing into the exhibit hall, I found the glass case wide open, no sign of forced entry, the black velvet pillow empty. The veil was gone. The overhead lights flickered as a fierce wind battered the windows. The museum felt like it was trembling. A spectral whisper echoed, "Join me, in winter's embrace." In the final hour before dawn, the storm raged, the building's temperature dropping so low my breath formed clouds. The ghost manifested again, drifting among the corridors, corners of my vision. She wanted me to follow her outside, to the swirling snow, to share her doom. Each time I refused, she grew more furious. Doors slammed. The wind roared through the entrance lobby, though no door was open. I was losing my nerve, half convinced I'd be found frozen by morning. But as dawn's faint light crept in, the presence receded. The overhead lights stabilized. The building's chill lifted slightly. When the day staff arrived, the storm had eased. They found me pale, trembling, the black veil missing from the exhibit. I told them a half-truth about a break-in. The manager believed none of my ghost talk. But the curator was unsettled, he knew the legends. He closed the museum for an inventory audit, effectively giving me the boot for the day. I never returned for another shift. I quit by phone, citing personal reasons. That winter, local headlines mentioned sightings of a veiled woman wandering Salem's snow-laden streets at night, near the old jailhouse ruins. People claimed she beckoned them to follow, only to vanish in swirling gusts. Some suspect the stolen veil freed her spirit from the museum's glass prison, letting her roam. I shudder at the thought. She was wrongfully condemned, a life ended in frigid loneliness. Now her ghost prowls, seeking to share that fate with anyone unfortunate enough to cross her path at night in Salem's winter chill. Sometimes, I dream of that corridor, the hush of the museum, the faint rustle of taffeta as she turned to face me. her hollow eyes, the sorrowful moan. I dream of the black veil in her grip, dripping spectral tears of vengeance. Even though I'm safe in my new job across town, I can't help but glance over my shoulder whenever snow taps at the window after midnight, half expecting a veiled figure outside, waiting for a second chance at retribution. So be warned, if you find yourself in Salem on a cold winter's eve, and you sense a chill that cuts deeper than the wind, or see a silhouette with a black veil out of the corner of your eye, retreat. For the spirit of Prudence Blackwood, or some other wrongly accused soul, may be out there, desperate to end her restless wandering, by taking you into the hush of that eternal winter. And once her veil falls over your face, no warmth of spring can ever free you from the fate she suffered centuries ago.